Hey there, everybody, and welcome to the Philanthropy Mastermind Series. I am your host, as you may know already, Jay Frost, and it's a pleasure welcoming you back to today's program, which is a CFRE accredited program. We are asked that often, does this offer credit or not? As you may know, we offer plenty of credits towards your accreditation, and you'll find lots of that programming over at the DonorSearch site at donorsearch.net. You can look up all the past programs and continue getting the education and gathering up credits. And additionally, you'll find a calendar of programs there and recordings of many sessions that we've done in the past. But I hope you'll stick around and not look there yet, because we have a lot coming at you in the next few minutes with our guest, Ben Mohler, who's going to share with us today. And I'm going to give you a little introduction to Ben, but I want to start by just welcoming you and saying that if you haven't already had a chance to just say howdy in the chat, we'd love that. And I know Ben would appreciate it as well. So please feel free at any point to use that as your sandbox and play, or just to say hello and maybe engage with the conversation. So, hey there, Sarah. Thank you very much for warming up the box for us. We really do appreciate that. And feel free to join Sarah there. We also have the Q&A. Hi there, Joe. We also have the Q&A, which is a great place to ask questions throughout, and we'll definitely be keeping an eye on that today. Hello, Michelle. Hello, Lily. It's good to see you all here. This is going to be a really important program for those of you who interact with your boards or who aspire to do so, or just maybe wondering what in the world to do in order to make sure that you have the opportunity to make them be their best selves, which they want to do, or else they wouldn't be serving there. Wow, this is great. Thank you, everybody, for saying hello in the chat. We're going to keep looking at that. So do keep talking if you want. I want to introduce Ben to you in case you're not familiar with his work already, although you may be. Ben, of course, is the chief executive and principal consultant at his firm GivingThree. You may know him in other guises as well. He is on the board of AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and is on the HP Journal Advisory Council. That's the, of course, the Association for Healthcare Philanthropy, and on the ACFRE board. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is not only does he hold that credential, under 125 or so people hold it, but he's also advancing the profession by making sure that the rest of us are aspiring to be the best we can be in both really doing our work well, but also doing it ethically. And that's something that we can look to folks like Ben to inspire us to do. He does have things coming up as well he'll probably tell you about later, including lecturing at AFP Lead, AFP Greater Dallas, the Emerging Leaders Board Development Session, which I believe is virtual, and maybe even a forthcoming book. But I'll let him tell you all about that. And first, I want to step back and let him share a little bit before we begin a conversation on board engagement. Ben, thank you so much for hanging out today.
Thank you for having me. And I'm loving the representation from Kentucky. I saw that in the chat, and I saw someone from Maryland is referencing some horse racing lingo. They get to talk about the trifecta. So I'm loving I don't see any bourbon references in the chat, but maybe a little bit early for that. It's still 3:30 here in Eastern time zone. So
right.
But yeah, great to be here. Talk about board engagement, and really, this is something that a topic that, as I've worked with boards over the years, just trends I have kind of gathered and things I've discovered, and over time, I've kind of consolidated it into some themes that I've begun to teach and train, and now I'm a consulting practice helping really train boards on some of these things, and it's great to be able to share some of these ideas with the folks on the call. So I see I'll be watching the chat for questions. It's hard to read. I don't have my glasses on. Sometimes I forget to wear my glasses. I actually have them here. So I'll keep an eye on that. If you have a question, put a Q in there so I can kind of see it. I'll be scanning for Qs. But we're going to be talking about board development as it specifically relates to engaging board members. And the reason why this is important is a lot of times we see board members joining our board, and the focus is on how it can be meaningful for our organization. And so you know this. The focus is on governance. It's on giving them a role that is meaningful to meet the needs of the organization. And a really simple measure of that is the governance measure of the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, the duty of obedience. And if you're new to board development, you may be wondering what does that mean? What does it mean to be an obedient board member? What does it mean to be a loyal board member? And really, it's quite simple. If you want more information about this, you can find it on Board Source. It's a great resource to find board stuff on boards. But to 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 basically summarize it is that the board duty of care is that every board member has a legal responsibility to participate actively in decision making on behalf of the organization. So they're exercising their best judgment on behalf of the organization. That is the thing that they're basically protecting the organization. And as a nonprofit, there is no shareholders. The nonprofit is represented by the greater good, and so they are basically the trustees for the greater good, and the duty of care maintains that the organization meets that legal requirement of meeting a local or community need. The duty of loyalty is that every member has to put the organization ahead of their own interests. And that means no self-dealing. That means that if there is an area where there may be either a real or perceived conflict of interest, that they would have to basically recuse themselves, and that they have to exercise judgment as it relates to the interests of the organization, not as it might relate to their own personal interests. So this would mean things like if you're a bank president and the organization is going to bid for someone to manage their finances, as a board member, you would like to have that business with your bank, but you'd probably be better to recuse yourself from that. And the final is the duty of obedience, which is board members, they bear their legal responsibility to ensuring that the organization complies with federal, state, local laws and adheres to its mission. And if it doesn't, then they have to be obedient to make sure that it comes in line and supports those things. So that's really the overarching idea of board service meeting the organizational needs. But what we're going to talk about today is a little beyond that. And that is, how do you engage a board that is meaningful personally? So that is meaningful for the individual board members themselves. And this is important because, maybe you've seen it with your boards that there are a tendency. I'll use an example. In 1965, there was a psychologist by the name of Bruce Tuckman that had this idea of what he called developmental sequence for small groups, and is basically, how do you engage members for high level performance? And he distilled it down into trends, and there are a lot of business books on these trends, but the trends were for small groups to perform at a high level. They have the stage of forming, then the stage of storming, then the stage of norming, and then after that, performing. And a lot of the boards that I had seen early in my career, and some of my clients working with them, is that the board service, it's very static, that people are recruited to serve on the board and they really get stuck at that forming stage, that they basically come and they're watching their watch, they're have an eye on the clock, and they're there for the free lunch, and basically they're just there, they're passive observers, they're rubber stamp board members, that they're not truly engaged. Even if they really care about the organization, they're not engaged at a very deep level. And what we see missing is that boards really are lacking the level of trust and personal engagement that really helps them break out of that forming stage, that helps them go into a stormy, norming, performing, that really accelerates the organization into a more engaging experience. And so that's why it's important to have boards that are engaged personally, and you want their board service to be meaningful personally. And what this means, and my research and my experience with boards, is that you have to engage not only their head, their hearts, but also their hands. And typically, when you engage a board, and I have some slides, but I will get to that a little bit later. When you engage a board with their service, their attendance at meetings, I mean that's a pretty basic sort of thing. But if you want to know someone's values, typically, I'll ask the question. I'll ask it rhetorically. Maybe I'll see some answers in the comments. What is the best way to assess what someone's values are? if you want to know what someone really, really values, what they hold important, what is the most critical? Yeah. Joe put it on, yeah, exactly. The wallet. What they spend their money on. And then the other one I see here is from Lawrence is what do they do? How do they spend their time? Ashley, I think you've been on my master class before. You've heard this before. If you want to know what someone truly values, you look at how they spend their time and how they spend their money. And when we engage board members, we really focus on how they spend their time. They come to meetings, but really, aside from just the routine experience of showing up, they're not really engaged really deeply with their time. And when it comes to where they spend their money, we typically we have the saying in nonprofits where we say, we ask a board member to, when they serve on the board, we ask them to do what was it, three things. They have to either, I'll see in the chat, the three things we typically ask board members to do when they join the board relating to money. They have to give, they have to, I'm seeing donate. Okay, so give, the 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 serve. Oh, you guys, you're giving me good answers. You're not giving me the cliche answer, which is give, get, or get off the board. Oh yeah, there you go. Linda has it right there. And what we're looking for is we want board members that don't give or get the money and or get off, but we want those that actually truly do, they give and they get, that they're ambassadors. Oh, Alexi, thank you. You were reading my brain there right there. And I'm just, for those that are hearing this on, maybe you're watching or listening to it on a podcast, the chat, great attention for everyone. Linda and Stacy, um, Joe, Alexi, great comments. You guys are, Marion and Michelle, you are, you're speaking my language there with the time, talent, and treasure. And that's really what we're getting after is we're looking for board members that aren't just there to fill a seat, aren't just there to give an opinion, aren't just there to look like they're important in the community, but ones that are truly engaged with their head, heart, and their hands. And so um, that's really gets to the root of what we're talking about in terms of the three I's of board engagement. Um, Now, if you want to look at what a board looks like where you have low board member engagement but high executive engagement, typically that structure where you have the trustees or the board members, they come and attend but are really passive, but you have the executive, the ED, the CEO, whatever, is very, very involved, very, very basically driving the train. That structure is what I would call autocratic, is that it's basically that leader is dragging the volunteers behind them. If there is high engagement from the trustees or the board members and low engagement from the executive, then you have what I would call leadership by fiat, where the trustees just kind of steamroll the executive. If engagement is low for both the board and for the executive, then that's what I call the leadership by default. That's where basically everyone just kind of shows up and everyone kind of reads the room and no one's really willing to speak up. And it just kind of things don't really happen for the organization, they happen to the organization. But what we're looking for is looking for board engagement that is high, very high, and matches that of a very highly engaged executive. And so when that happens, when you have both the executive and the board engaged, then you have what is called a collaborative environment. But you need to have trust. There has to be mutual trust between the board and the executive, and that's really that piece of trust is born out in the implementation of this idea of the three I's of board engagement. Now, if you've done some Google searching on me or on this topic, maybe you found what those three I's are. Does anyone in the chat want to guess what the three I's are? And if so, I might just put you on screen and have you give the overview. I'm not seeing any brave souls here. All right, the three I's are involve, which is their hands, how they get involved in the work. The investing is the heart. Yes. Oh, Joe. And then the last one is the influence, and that's the head. And you may be asking yourself, involve with the hands, that makes sense. Invest with the heart, how is giving money, how is giving philanthropy heart? But we'll get to that. And the last one, the head influence, how does that connect? And as I've done this, as I've applied this with some of my clients and my professional practice as a nonprofit executive, I saw that people, by getting involved with their hands, by getting involved in the business of the board, by serving on committees, by serving in task forces to actually bring their experience to bear for the organization, they the service becomes more meaningful for them. And because it becomes more meaningful for them, it becomes more part of them. And as they become more involved and they kind of embody that mission more, then they feel more inclined to give, to invest. They give the heart. And really, philanthropy is basically selfless action for the greater good. Is that you're doing something out of a spirit of generosity, out of your heart. And so when you make a personal investment into the mission of organization, you're expressing, you're investing in the mission. You're really aligning your gifts, your financial support with your values. And as you do that more and more, as you invest philanthropic dollars in the mission of the organization, what you will see is that your head, that piece of involving your head, the logical piece becomes less effort. I don't know if maybe by a show of hands on Zoom, or just like a little some sort of emoji on in the chat. Maybe you've seen board members where they have to like give, um, you practice like an elevator speech where they have to talk about the organization, and it just seems really dry, really rehearsed, really strained. Do any of you have had the experience where board members just feel really stressed to talk about it? Yeah. Oh yeah. Lots of I hear little pops in my ear, which is great. Um, and really what you're looking for is you're looking for board members that are so engaged that they shouldn't have to think about the mission. They shouldn't have to rehearse an elevator speech. They should be able to say it in their own words. And if they're involved with their hands, if they've done the work, they're reading the meeting minutes, you have your mission moments, and they are fully immersed in the work. And they are giving out of generosity. They're not giving so much that hurts, but they're giving so much that it feels really good. Then there shouldn't be a lot of thinking about how do you talk about the mission, because they're talking from the heart. And that's really important, is that you want to have them go from the hands to the heart. And then that makes it so that when they speak logically, that emotion's coming out. It's very evidenced. And the reason why it's important is that, so we'll talk about investing, is that you want to, board members really, they increase organizational credibility when they are giving personally. And it makes it so that when they're talking about why others should give or support or get involved, it has more impact, more meaning, because they have that credibility of they support the organization. And so, they can talk about their personal experience. I'll talk about an experience that I had. I've actually done this exercise a few times with board members, where we will talk about their passion for the mission, and I'll have them bring a prop or an element that they'll actually talk about why the mission is important to in their own words, but they'll use this item. It's like a mystery item that they will bring to a board meeting. And it's really kind of interesting to see what item they'll use to describe why the mission is important to them. And as they talk about this item, they talk about their why for supporting the organization. They're not talking about an elevator speech. They're not saying some rehearsed mission or vision that they've had to memorize, but they talk from the heart in a way that is really deeply moving. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for board members that are able to exhibit influence in their community because they are giving with their hands, they're giving with their heart, and they're able to influence because their head is fully in the game. Is this making sense for everybody? Sarah's tracking with me. So is Brenda. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate you. Josh is, yep. Joe. Thank you, Joe. All right. So you may be asking yourself, let's cut to, yeah. Lily, thank you, Lily. Michelle, it's good to see you. Lily, good to see you too. It's good to see some familiar names on the in the chat here. And Sheila, good to meet you. All right. And Joe, yes, Joe, it's a fun exercise. Actually, every time I run the exercise, the room ends up in tears, which is really, it's a great moment when you can have a board meeting and everyone's crying. You know that their hearts are fully in the game. So let's talk about what I like to call the 5 stages of board service. And hopefully I can click over to this. All right. Here are the 5 stages of board engagement. I know we talked about the 3 I's of board engagement, but here's the 5 stages of board service. And this is important because, the engaging, that sunshine, that's where we're going to be talking about the 3 I's. But that can't exist in isolation. You have to have the full environment to be successful. And you'll see here, there's a gardening theme that's intentional. I actually am working on a book, and it's going to have a gardening theme. It's not out with the publisher yet, but when it is, you'll see it on LinkedIn. So if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, please do that. You'll probably see me post it there first. Um, anyway, the 5 stages of board service. It really begins with recruiting. And what does recruiting look like? I like to use the example of, let me second advance the slide here. Okay, seed packets. So recruiting board members to serve on your board is you're looking for a strategic implementation of the board building matrix. So you have a board matrix, and you're not just finding anyone off the street that will serve on the board. Some organizations, surprisingly enough, they are just anyone that has a pulse, that's who they recruit. Or anyone that's a friend of a board member, anyone that's, a friend of a friend or family member, which is not what you really want to do. You want to recruit board members based on an assessment of what skills, experience, perspectives you currently have, and that you're looking and recruiting based on the things that you need, both in the short term and the long term. So you're looking to mix skills and experience, and you want to be clear in the expectation that every individual board member that you're recruiting is going to have what you would call an individual board member engagement plan. And that's where the 3 I's come in. And that's the sunshine. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But you have to begin planting that seed as you are selecting your board members. And all these puns. All right. So once you have the board members, you're engaging them. They are aware that they're going to have an individual engagement plan where they're going to have to articulate their personal service of their involvement, their investment, and their influence. Then you'll begin what I like to call, here's a quote: recruiting based on talent, recruit based on experience, recruit based on passion, then sit back and watch the magic happens. It's like I don't know if as a kid you might remember in school you would put a lima bean or kidney bean or something in a wet paper towel, and you put it on a warm windowsill, and after a while it start to sprout. And that's kind of what you're doing. You're looking for the right seeds. You want to be careful not to pick thistles or dandelions. You're looking for board members that will bear fruit. And so you're going to look to recruit based on talent. You're going to look to recruit based on experience and passion, and then watch that seed sprout. But make sure that you stay away from the thistles and the dandelions, because you want board members that are actually beneficial and provide value and add fruit, or vegetables if you're inclined. All right, onboarding. So the way I like to talk about onboarding is these little seed starter pots. I don't know if you've seen these before. They're usually made of cardboard or pulp, or I think there's sometimes they're made of manure. But basically what they do is it gives your seed a safe place to start. And the way I like to talk about onboarding as it relates to these starter pots is that you're inculcating organizational values, is that you're making sure that before you transplant them and put them fully on the board, that they have a chance to grow strong roots, that they have a chance to establish themselves, and able to withstand the frost of winter. So the goal is that you want to instill the idea with board members about their duties for care, loyalty, and obedience. You make sure that they're insured to serve the interests of the organization and the greater good. And a way that you might also reinforce this is to have a board manual that helps them with sense making. So they're not, if they have a question about Robert's rules or due diligence, about the audit, about in dealing or conflict of interest or confidentiality, they have something to turn to. And that's what I would say that's the onboarding stage. And I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. If you have questions, throw them up in the chat. I'm watching it. The next is orientation. So orientation is, I would say, it's different than onboarding. Orientation is that you are not just planting your seeds and make sure they have strong roots. They already have these things. They have the skills that they need to basically thrive. But what you're doing is that you are, since you've been intentional with the onboarding, that you are able to transplant them and put them in rows. And the way this relates is that you're informing your board members of their board service responsibility and the structure of the board. So this is going to involve training and education about their specific roles. Maybe they're on a committee, informing them what that committee does, informing them about the mission, the organization, how it's structured. So all those things that relates to their formal role on the board, not just their governance duties, not just the culture, but actually the work. And this is where during orientation, I would recommend that you would consider an orientation program that pairs up or mentors more seasoned board members with new coming board members. That way they have like a buddy as they come onto the board. They have a question, they get confused, they don't know which time the meeting is or where the meeting is. Instead of emailing the whole group, they can just discreetly call that one person and say, "Hey, I have a question. I don't know. I need to make a motion during the meeting about something in the minutes that don't make sense, or I need to flag an issue." Like they can have something to talk to and kind of work through those issues kind of offline a little bit. And it really helps them become a little bit better oriented to the board. All right, watching the chat. I don't see any questions yet. All right. And then the next one, this is the engaging. This is the sunshine. This is the one where we talk about the 3 I's. So the engaging the board member. So let's paint the picture. They're on the board. They've been recruited. They have an expectation that they're going to be expected to develop their individual engagement plan, which is going to include their investment, involvement, and influence with the board. And so they know it's coming. They're going to be onboarded, so they'll understand their governance responsibility. They'll have gone through orientation, so they'll be able to talk with another board member. They'll have already established that strong bond. They'll understand what the organization does and what they're trying to achieve. The engagement is really giving them all the things, all the water, the sunlight, the nutrients, all the things they need to thrive, to actually really, really be engaged in the work. So the engagement planning basically plans out the specific actions that individuals will take to achieve meaningful involvement, investment, and influence on the board. So these actions are going to reinforce their governance role and insider status as leadership advocates for the organization. So they're not going to just sit down and work out this engagement plan in isolation. They're going to do it in concert with the CEO or the ED, the president of the board. And it's not going to be basically a thing where they are, assigned, "Hey, go fill out your engagement plan and then come back." It really should be a conversation. And I would encourage it to be a conversation that happens between the individual board members and the individual executive. And one of the reasons why is that you have to establish a level of trust between individuals. We talk about the forming, storming, norming, and performing. In order for there to be trust, in order for the board to be able to break through beyond just that route, showing up to board meetings and just, being there in the default leadership style, you have to establish trust. And the best way to do that is to have one-on-one connection between the executive and the individual board members, establish that trust, and be able to have very direct conversations and make that the norm of the organization. So, so I would include not just a initial conversation between the board member and the executive, but also a mid-year review. to make sure that they're on track, make sure that the things they set out to do at the beginning of the year, that that's still the plan, that they're still tracking well, they still are getting the resources that they need to be successful. And that if they're not, that you can have that conversation. Or if they're not feeling that they're being stretched enough, they want to do something more or to a greater extent, that you can have that conversation. So this is very important. And it puts them in a position where they can grow as big as they want to grow. All right. Any questions so far? I don't see anything in the chat. All right, I'll keep going.
We do have one in the Q&A though.
Oh, where is it?
It's been there for a good bit.
Oh, I didn't see that. Brenda, okay. We are a nonprofit elementary school. We have a board that hasn't been active since the new principal took over in 2020. We've tried to reach out to the chair to call on a meeting to start engagement with members, but he won't return our calls or emails. What should we do? um, so your board has basically they were recruited and then COVID happened, and since COVID happened, they have not been engaged. They're not, it sounds like they're not even out to the chair. So you're trying to reach out to the chair, actually trying to have board meetings, and you really need to have annual board meetings in order to stay legal. Wow, this is it might be one where you look for a new chair. If you have board guidelines, you may be able to select a new chair that's actually responsive. The other thing you might do is look at are they, if they're not meeting, then you may have to get a whole new board. It seems rather drastic, but Brenda, I'm guessing there's probably some deeper details there. So if you like, send me a note later and we can talk about that. All right. That's you might feel that that's a rare sort of thing. That's actually not very rare to have board members that are not involved or not engaged. And that's why this is so important. All right, I'm going to go back to this. All right. So we had the board engagement. And then after you had the board engagement, and this kind of gets to that question, personal ownership is powerful, especially when it comes to board service. So it seems like an issue that that board is experiencing is that they don't have personal ownership. If they personally own that board, that they would be responsive, that they would want to meet, that they would feel some sort of duty to fulfill their obligations as a board member. And that's why this last bullet is so critical. Renewal. So you have this engagement plan. Every board member has gone through it. They've identified areas where they're going to be involved, where they're going to invest, and they're going to influence. The idea of renewal, really want to focus on using the gardening theme again, the pruning and weeding. So pruning is, and you may have seen this, as gardening kind of exploded during the COVID era, people became more aware of what pruning was. It's not just you're lopping off the top of a plant, but you're being very, very thoughtful about trimming away the parts that are not productive and focusing time and effort on the parts of the plant that are productive. And so the same thing comes with the board member, that you want to make sure that every board member is not involved in every single thing, but you're involving them in an area where they have the highest level of interest and engagement, the area where they feel most personally fulfilled. So that's pruning, is that you don't want to have every board meeting, every committee meeting, a meeting of the whole. You want to have it so that board members are involved in committees or task force that are personally meaningful to them. So that's the pruning thing, is just to focus their time in the area that is most important to them. The second is weeding. So the weeding gets to that thing we talked about earlier about give, get, or get off the board. And really, it shouldn't be either or. They should be both giving and, which I don't like to call it giving, I like to call it investing, and not getting, but influencing. They should be doing both, investing and influencing. And if they're not doing those things, then there should be a process by which you enforce your board service to only include the ones that are fully engaged. That there should be some sort of recourse that if they're not invested, involved, and influencing on behalf of the organization, that there's a process by which you thank them for their service, and then you make room for folks that do want to be involved, investing and influencing. So the renewal stage, basically you're aligning the evolving needs of the organization with that of individual board members. You're making sure that there is alignment. It may be that your organization is going through a growth stage that doesn't need the skill they brought to the board at a certain time. Maybe you're going through a stage where you're doing some sort of merge or acquisition or some sort of rapid growth, and they were recruited to serve maybe as a legal expert to provide that sort of guidance. Maybe you've passed that season and their engagement is kind of waning, and that's okay. Every organization goes through stages, and it's okay for board members to serve their term and to move on to new things. So the idea of engagement planning is that you are involving your board members to be involved in meaningful ways, and if their service is not meaningful, that you give them a way to exit gracefully. So you also want to assess based on the board matrix, so that you're recruiting based on needs. You have diverse perspectives and experience and opinions, but also that you're measuring based on performance. That if they're not, holding up their end, they're not doing the things they said they would do, that you would give them a way to exit. And I would say this should be something that persists through the duration of their service. What this does, it establishes organizational momentum that you really do hold people to the expectation to be involved, investing, and influencing on behalf of the organization. And if they're not, then it's not a good fit for them. And that's why I would go to this idea of I'll go back to this first slide, that this is not an environment that you can do just the engaging by itself. Really, you have to have that whole environment. The challenge of this is that a lot of our organizations that we want to be quick to move right to engagement. And you're going to have a process in your board where you may have to get to this deeply engaged board through attrition. Basically, as folks roll off and you recruit new board members and you recruit with the new expectation, and over time, that new expectation will become the norm. But until then, you're going to have to deal with the folks that are on the board that maybe don't have that expectation, that maybe they weren't recruited with the idea of involving, investing, influencing. And so you got to just show them some grace in that process and allow them to either adapt to the new expectation, or that they can roll off the board whenever the time is appropriate. So that is the balance of what I hope to cover. And I am open to other questions that the group may have for me.
Thank you so much for that, Ben, all
Yeah.
of it. And I know as people probably populate with more questions here, they may have questions or thoughts they want to share with you afterwards. So this is not to make anybody go away, but I'd love it if they knew how to reach you as we're having this discussion in case they roll off for some reason. So
Yeah.
how can they reach out to you afterwards?
Probably the best way to reach me is honestly LinkedIn. I'm on there quite a bit. And actually, I think I have, oh, look at there. I have my information.
Ooh, okay. And by the way, for anybody who's going to use that QR code, I love that. Keep your phones handy. If you're using your phone to do that, you may be doing it a different way, because there will be one at the very end of the presentation too. So when when we say goodbye to Ben today, there will be another QR code that you can use to access additional content from DonorSearch, including recordings of a lot of the sessions here. But do take a picture of this one so you can,
Yeah,
if you want, just find them on
that
LinkedIn.
will put my personal contact information onto your phone. So that's my cell phone number. That's my email address. And if you do that little QR, it's going to put that on your device. Except for the folks in Kentucky, call me anytime. Even if you get, caught in jail, you need someone to come bail you out. For those that are outside of Kentucky, I'm sorry.
Bail bonds. That's not a session we've had yet.
No.
We do have a couple questions that came in from Rachel and Sarah, if you want to tackle those.
Sure. Let's see. What kind of tools do board members need to feel engaged? So for the engagement planning, I wonder if I have a slide that shows this. Let me see. Actually, if you email me, I will send you a copy of this. This is I have a board member engagement plan that I give out freely. It's a one page that the board member fills out and you walk through it with them. And I also have an example sheet that compiles examples that board members have actually shared, and I've recorded some really cool ones. So if you email me, I'm happy to send you those examples. But I try to make it very, very simple. I try to make it so that um, there's not a lot of tools, not a lot of resources that you can just go in with one sheet of paper and make it so that the board members don't feel like they have to learn a whole new lingo or a whole new, like have equipment or gear, that it can be conversational because you're looking to build relationships with your board members.
Ben, one other question. Is it possible for you to share this slide deck? We do send an email following up
Yeah.
the
Yeah, I'd be happy
presentation.
to. Yeah.
Okay, so
I'd be happy to.
if you share that with us, we'll make sure that everybody gets a copy. And then let me see, we had that question from Sarah.
Okay. Other than the standard dinners and lunches, how have you found success in celebrating and appreciating your board members?
Hmm.
So I'm on the board for United Way of Kentucky, and one of the things that I'm chairing the development committee, and we are talking about how to actually implement this idea of involve, invest, and influence. And the thing that we're doing is that we're focusing when the development committee meets, and then also as a report out to the board, that we don't focus on just the fundraising, but we also celebrate when board members have success in their different areas of engagement. So that we celebrate the milestones about terms of service, leadership roles, that we celebrate whenever the board reaches 100% participation in giving. But also if they have recruited a board member, that we really create an atmosphere of celebration around them meeting their goals that they've actually outlined to do. The other thing that we do is that we try to um, do an annual retreat. This is something I would encourage you to do with your board. Is that number one, you schedule your board meetings a year in advance. That you don't just like, okay, at this meeting, let's schedule the next meeting, but you'd have an annual board meeting where you plan the next year. And I would even say that you would do that at your annual meeting, which would be like midway through, like the midway point. And so you'd have at most 6 board meetings out of a basically a year and a half scheduled out in advance, or at bare minimum, at least two, the next two. And that you're always at that when you have two scheduled, that you at that next one that you schedule the next four. And you're always like adding those. And you keep it the same sort of schedule, and that you have either an annual retreat or every other year have a board retreat where you get away, where everyone is like away from computers. Whenever I try to do board retreats, I try to do someplace rustic, usually the fall, usually with campfires or, beverages and like cool weather, and people are outside and gathering around a fire Coleman had this great ad years ago. It talked about how the campsite was this original social networking site. And there's a lot of truth to that. Just standing around a fire with other people and just talking about not necessarily your board service, but talking about your life and interests and passions, and just bonding is really important. So I would encourage you to do, at least every other year, but preferably every year, do a retreat where you get away, where people stay overnight if you can. That's really ideal. And the way that I usually formulate my retreats is that we go away. The first night is a group dinner, and people are rolling in. We have dinner, happy hour, social hour, whatever. And that we go to, we sleep at the hotel or whatever, the retreat center. The next morning, it's a later start with breakfast and whatnot, where people can bond. And then you start around 9:30, and you have just, a half day, 4 hours of discussion. And then you have some like, lunch. You don't want to pack the agenda. You want to have it so that people have time to bond. But doing that every year creates this tight network. Because one of the things that people forget about when they're building boards is that board members, they're serving because they feel a duty to give back. Number one, they serve because they feel a responsibility to do something with, their time, their experience, whatever. but they also want to be around others that share their values. And we don't really give them a chance to actually enjoy that experience of actually enjoying being around those people. Like, and that's why the retreat is important. Or if you can build it into your meetings where they can show up early or stay late, and that you're encouraging them to build those social bonds outside of just the meetings. It creates a norm and it makes it so that when you get into a board discussion that is could be tenuous, it could be heated. If they have that trust already established, it makes it so the conversation, and there may be firm opinions and may be very heated, but if they've established personal bonds, that they're going to be more respectful and be more productive. So
That
that would
must
be,
make that
yeah.
must make that advanced scheduling particularly important
Oh yeah.
because you want everybody to be at that, or else it ends up being like the senior trip that somebody couldn't go on, and that just fractures the social network. But if they're
Yeah.
all together, it's different, right?
Yeah. And if you're building a board where they feel personally involved and they feel personally engaged and they actually like the folks they serve next to, then they want to go on those retreats. They want to be at meetings. They don't skip. They don't have excuses. They make time. We
Mhm.
talked about this earlier. If you want to see where someone's values are, see where they spend their time and their money. They'll actually protect the time because the time is so rewarding, not just because the work they're doing, but because they actually enjoyed the time with others.
And I have another question for you too,
Yeah.
just until something else comes up on the chat here. There's been a lot of discussion in our field, especially over the last 3 years, but really forever, about full community representation on our boards. And one of the parts of that discussion has to do with whether or not everybody on the board is in a position to give. You talked about the importance of not just a give or get policy, but give and get policy and investing
Yeah.
or making that charitable investment. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about ensuring that there's full representation and yet we invite people to invest or give in a way that's appropriate to themselves, where everybody feels equal when they go to that big, campsite together.
Yeah. So I think it's important that everyone does give, but what that looks like, I would say not necessarily a set number. I've heard a lot of discussions of board members saying, well, we can't set a number of like $1,000 or 10,000 or whatever the number is.
Mhm.
I agree. I say the number should be whatever is personally meaningful for them. As a member of the board, that their philanthropy to the organization should be among the top of their philanthropies. To be, and they should give in a way that represents what is personally meaningful for them. So that could be a different amount for anybody, and it could also be different forms. So for some, maybe it's a current gift. Some maybe it's a deferred gift. Someone's some sort of gift in kind or gift of service, or it's. But it should be they should spend time to be intentional about giving in a way that is personally meaningful. That should be the overarching metric.
There was something else we talked about before we went live, and that's about underperforming boards. And you said, well, maybe that's something we can talk about. And I'd love to know how you would characterize that, but also maybe on the other end of that question, how you know when you got things kind of going right. Because often when you live through an experience where things aren't going the way they should, sometimes it's difficult to know, have we passed that point and are we ready to do some different kind of work together? So what does underperforming look like? And what does it look like when things are kind of on the rails again? So you can start thinking about the big projects.
Underperforming board are boards where they show up and it's obvious they haven't read the materials, or when everyone is just saying the same thing, but they're saying it a different way just to make themselves sound like they know what they're talking about.
Hmm.
A highly performing board is a board that has reviewed the materials in advance and comes in ready to act with a consent agenda. And the majority of the board discussion is on generative discussion. It's on discussion that is digging down to a deeper level. It's making sense and assessing, is this the right direction? Is this the right decision? And it's digging down to a more fundamental level than just, rereading notes or minutes or action items or reporting committee notes out. Really, there should not be a lot of reading or reporting out. There should be everyone's read the materials. They came ready to actually dig down and discuss a deeper level. It's like, Jay, it's like, you ever been a member of a book club?
Actually, no. And
Oh,
I mean, we read a lot here, but not a book club. Sorry.
so I've been a member of a book club, and maybe someone in the chat can
Yeah.
align with this, but where you you show up to the book club and you've read the book and you're excited about to discuss about the themes, the elements, or like the illusions or the allegories or whatever. And it's obvious that no one else has read the book. They've read the dust cover, they've read the summary, they've read the introduction, they've read some cliff notes, whatever, and they have a knowledge of the book, but they don't have a deep understanding of the book. They haven't dug down and actually taken time to actually absorb it. And yes, I create a book club, and my friends just wanted a margarita club. It's painful, so yes. So you want your board meetings where it's you want to have a book club where they have all read the book, and you're excited to get together, not because you love each other and just want to hang out and have margaritas, but because you're ready to actually talk about the book at a deeper level. And it's a hard way to describe a high performing board, but that's how I describe it. Is if you come to a board meeting and everyone is like so in that it's like they've read the book and they're ready to, actually discuss the book at a deeper level, that's a good board.
But are there signs between the meetings? Let's say you have
Oh yeah.
quarterly
Oh
meetings
yeah.
of your
They're
board. Are
they're
there
not
tip
responding to
offs?
yeah, they're not responding to meeting requests or calls. The one that the earlier question about, there's not responding to calls, like that's a board I would have zero patience for that. I would fire them all and start over. But yeah, and it's one where the board, I mean, it's just the one where they're trying to influence their agenda, like they're trying to get friends on the board or do things to or they're it's all the things that we feel and see and we're like, oh, why is this, why? And it's so draining. um yeah, if you're on this call, I'm guessing if you're doing this webinar, I'm assuming you're probably very well what the signs are. I'm curious to know if you can give us some examples of the signs that you're seeing, or that maybe you don't want to talk about your signs, but maybe signs that you've heard about from a friend.
And those may come through here. I know sometimes people are shy about talking about that. We will not be reading names on that one. We did have a note from Joe earlier, and it relates to something you addressed, but maybe I wonder if there's another dimension to it. He asks if it's typical for nonprofit boards to have an expected level of financial support. And you did talk about it very clearly, which I love, that example about people, making it a philanthropic priority, but that's different for every person. But do you sometimes work with boards and help them to establish maybe a group goal as a way of kind of heading towards something? Or is that also putting people in a tough position?
I would say it depends on the board. And you never know what people may not say. They may be feeling like, oh, this is not fair or not
Mm.
convenient, or that I'm feel like I'm being put on the spot, and they may not say anything. So you may want to, be cautious of that. What I always encourage is that you would at least measure participation. So you'd have just an ongoing participation goal of like 100% participation. And from a credibility standpoint, to say that every member of the board gives at a level that is personally meaningful, I think that's a very easy thing to start measuring. I've done this in the past where I've set that participation goal. We went from like one or two board members giving occasionally every few years to they all saw that it was a measure and it was in the board measures,
Mm-hmm.
and like they were celebrating when they got to 100%. Like they were really pumped and they want to know who do I need to talk to. And we didn't say the list of names, but we people like talking to each other like, hey, if you haven't given, you really should. Like, they really got excited about celebrating when they all got to 100%. And that was the shared goal, was 100%.
And that kind of clarity is really powerful. But who's reporting out on that in order to make it so it works? Is that the board chair? Is it the development committee chair? Is it the ED? I mean, or does it depend on the organization?
I don't know that it has to be any specific person. I'd say it just becomes part of the board overall structure, is that you have it so that you're reporting as part of your overall board engagement,
Right.
that it could be something that the board chair reports out. I mean, I don't know that it really matters. It just
Okay.
matter of we're changing the tone of the board, and that we measure and report on this.
Right. Understood. Um, and I know we have some notes now from Ashley and Sheila about the warning signs.
The ones they've heard friends talk about this, they've heard, their own margarita club, people have lamented these things. Always running late to meetings,
Right.
wanting to zoom in to in person. Yes. Yes. Or when they don't show up, or people are getting burned out or aren't engaged. I had one where we were doing a training on how to navigate the board portal to be able to download materials and read materials and vote online whenever we had like an emergency vote or something. And we had iPads passed out so they can actually follow along, learn how to do it.
Right.
And make sure everyone was able to get logged on to the site and everything. And we had one member that said, "Oh yeah, I'm on," but they're like on their phone and like they weren't on the site. Someone walked around behind them and they weren't on the site. So yes, they say they're engaged, but they're not.
Well, you just said it. Part of this is also training and facilitation. And I'm sure when you're putting these things in place initially, it's a matter of making sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing where if you're trying to establish this culture, it's not something you can change overnight because you have some folks to be like, well, when I joined, we read the materials in our meetings. I didn't have to prepare in advance, or they may not say that out loud, but they'd be thinking it. And
Mm-hmm.
so over time, building the board through attrition, that you release the ones that are underperforming, you embrace the ones that are performing or overperforming, and as you recruit new board members, that you basically instill the new trend line, the new expectations for how you're going to measure their engagement.
Yeah. Ben, thank you so much for all of this today. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. And I know you're just in a way scratching the surface of what you could share with us, but I know that it's been immensely valuable for everybody here. You can tell a lot of people are resonating with that. Once again, I know people can reach out to you. I don't know if you want to put that back
Oh yeah,
on the
sure.
screen so people can find you if they didn't take a picture of it before. So pull out your phones if not. I encourage you to to follow his work on LinkedIn and beyond, especially the speaking he's going to be doing in the book, whose title he will not be announcing today, but it'll be coming out pretty soon. So take a look for that. I know you'll benefit from it. And I want to encourage all of you to, of course, keep coming to sessions like this one. That hopefully we'll be able to keep tackling this issue about making sure that boards can be their best selves, and we have a lot to do with that. So, thank you so much, Ben. Really do
Yeah.
appreciate you and everything you do for us in the field. Thank you, everybody, for being here today, and do stay tuned because in a second you're going to see another little QR code that'll take you to recordings of sessions like this one, and this one itself, along with the slides from it, will be coming to you via email. So if you don't see that in the next 48 hours, look to your spam folder. And if you're not getting notes about these sessions, make sure you go to the DonorSearch site. DonorSearch has been underwriting this series since 2016, over 500 programs and counting. You'll see right at the top of the page, you can subscribe. They won't pester you. It's just a way to make sure that you know what's happening here. So until next time, take care. And again, thanks to the great Ben Mohler. See you all soon.
Bye, y'all.